Hi everyone, welcome to the Claranet Driven podcast. Today we are going to be looking at demystifying the cloud. My friend and colleague Andrea has joined me today, who is going to speak with me around some of the questions that she gets asked and that she's thought of herself around how cloud works, some of the things that people maybe overcomplicate and hope that I can make it really simple. So the topic and the thought for this one came out of some of the questions we get asked. We work on quite a lot of projects together. So a lot of customers, sometimes when we're talking about things, you can see that we've probably gone too far too early, and they've got some questions that we probably should have answered before. So we're hoping today to be able to do that, to make some of these things a bit more simple. For those that are listening or seeing us for the first time, my name's Steve Old. I'm a cloud specialist team lead at Claranet, and I do quite a bit of our consultancy work with customers.
My name's Andrea Staunton. I'm project manager for the hosting business unit at Claranet.
So,
well, the first one and the biggest question is, what is the cloud?
It's a really, really very good question, and I think every time I get asked this, I have a different answer. I think the cloud as a concept is really heavily overcomplicated, and it comes down to going back to the very basics of what computing is. So if people remember that computers are just ones and zeros, and that they in themselves don't even know what they are, we have to tell them, and it's all around giving them an idea of what they're trying to do. So when computing and when servers came around and hosting and Claranet and other companies started in that world, we initially focused on physical hardware. To give you an idea of that, it's like having a field where you own the entire field, you can do whatever you like with it. It has the ability to turn into anything you might want it to be. But what you generally find is you'll only probably use a bit of that field. So, if it was me, I'd put a football goal in, I'd just kick around with that. Or, I'd probably have my veg patch over there. But there's going to be huge amounts of wasted space. So virtualization was the next thing that came in. Virtualization is like turning that big field into a load of allotments.
Yeah. And
so it's a lot more compressed, a lot better used. You can use those particular parts for what you want to do. And it basically, there's a study in about 2015-16 by the government that suggested that only 12% of the capability of dedicated servers was used. 88% was wasted. So that's where virtualization came in. And then when virtualization came in, you got people like Amazon who suddenly realized that they needed loads and loads of these, and then they kind of worked out we could sell some of this. And initially they actually just sold a couple of services, but they have built fields and fields and fields and fields of allotments. And that's what the cloud is. It is access to this huge resource that you can never afford to have yourself.
Yeah.
But then you've got the companies that are able to do this, so Microsoft, Google, Alibaba, AWS, IBM, Oracle, there's quite a lot who have gone after the market, who have then got so much money coming in from other revenue streams and from the reselling of this at such scale that then they're able to put so much work into R&D. So they're constantly adding new things. So reInvent was a really good example. We did a webinar recently on all the new things that came out and their uses. But they're coming out with thousands of products a year, which are just there to add and improve and do what you can. Amazon came up with something called Ground Station, which allows you to remote operate satellites through AWS. That's the kind of money that they've got to do these things and to solve problems that people probably couldn't have done on their own.
Yeah.
And so what is the cloud? The cloud is access to technologies and compute that you just couldn't do yourself.
Yeah.
I think is the moral of the story now. And you can really complicate that if you keep it as simple as it's almost a blank canvas on being able to do what you want with technology. That's really where we are now.
How safe is it in terms of security?
Yeah, so the biggest concern most people have is security in general these days. So Claranet did a report, and the top of the list was 44% of CIOs. Top concern this year, sorry, in 2018, last year, is security. And when you actually dig into it and look into the statistics, you are safer on public cloud than you are on premise. Largely because you're paying a company to do all the patching and all those bits, and they've got to do it on such a scale. The risk of them not doing it is far greater. While I go speak to people who are on premise and they tell me they're still running Windows 2003 servers. I went to see someone recently who's still using Windows XP, which I loved XP. I was great on it, but it's a real risk for their business. So often actually, there's a few benefits. A, that it's being kept up to date, but B, you have a chance to start again. So some of my background was in making online games, and I was a teenager at the time. So this isn't exact like for like with all customers, but I used to be doing something. I used to have to maybe go make a change, open something up to allow me to download something or whatever it might be to make a change, and then my mum would call me for dinner, and then I'd go downstairs and I'd forget to close it. Right? We have similar things. Someone comes to your desk and asks you a question, and you, with public cloud, with the technology and the things that it allows you to do if you use things like infrastructure as code, which we'll talk about a bit, you basically have the ability to, every time you make a change, it wipes the slate clean and makes sure it goes back to that secure world. So you've got a chance to start again, to get rid of those things that aren't secure. Those projects that come in that someone says, I need it by Friday, and you go, well, how am I going to do this? Oh, I'm going to find this server that was doing something else. I'll plug that back in. Hopefully it's still all right. And I'll put it behind another firewall that's already doing something else. It'll have to be okay because I haven't got the time. I'll go back and do it eventually. No one ever goes back and does it eventually, right? If we don't have the time, no one has the time. So you've got that chance to build it right. You've got the fact that Amazon, Microsoft and Google are spending millions upon millions on security, whether that's the physical security of the data center, whether it's the software security and the SDN. So the amount of money there is making that significantly more safe than you probably are on premise. However, something is only as safe as the person using it. So if you do it badly, you absolutely have the same risk of that, and you've got to know what you're doing. I think that's where people like Claranet or partners come in. That as much as there are tools out there that help you know when you've done something insecure, having people that have made those mistakes, being burnt, done them before, means you reduce the risk a lot. So cloud should be, in essence, safer than if you're doing it yourself on premise. But it's only as good as the people doing it. So if you do it really well on premise, you'll be okay. If you do it really badly in cloud, you won't. Simple.
So around that as well, where is the data? So if I'm a customer, where is my data?
Again, a common question due to the B word that's bouncing around the UK at the moment. No one knows what it's going to mean in terms of data sovereignty. What's next? Do you have to have your data in the UK? Can it be an island? If you're looking at Google, they were in Belgium first. Microsoft were in London pretty early, and AWS were in Dublin first. So a lot of people that went early would actually have these things in the EU somewhere, but that was fine because it's the EU. Now that's a bit trickier, right? We think we might need to keep it in the UK. We're not sure what it means. All of them have worked really hard toward this. So if you use services and use them in the right way, they will be in the geographic position that you put them in. So if you look at S3 storage, so S3 storage is the kind of thing that makes Dropbox run. It's an ability just to put files somewhere in a big bucket, and you can use them in really cool different ways.
And easily accessible.
Easily accessible, exactly, if you want it to be. Or you can lock it down if you don't. But there are S3 versions that are global. So you can have it available anywhere globally, so it's cached in different places. So if someone needs it in Dublin, they can get it quickly. If someone needs it in Sydney, they can get it quickly. So there's those technologies. But you can lock that down so it doesn't happen. And so you've got to understand what you're trying to do. But your data, if you look at the services you're using, you can make sure it remains in the region you want it to. AWS is a good example. For the most part, for the services you use, the regions don't talk to each other. They've added that recently that they can, but only for certain technologies. But for a lot of it, if you run a virtual machine, one of those little allotments, it will only exist where you've put it. It won't exist somewhere else. In the field you've chosen.
Okay. And you said about having it cached here and cached there, and various geographical locations. Does it having your data in the cloud, does that make you more vulnerable to hackers?
No, unless you do it wrong. Same kind of idea. What is interesting when you look at most successful hacking attempts, they are not down to technology. They might be down to outdated technology. That's one of your high risks. But so much of it now comes down to social engineering and all stuff like this. The guys at Sec1 can talk about this wonderfully. But it's more about your processes and what you do around that. If you are a high-profile company, your risk of hacking is significantly better. If you are not vigilant and haven't trained your staff well, your risk of something like CryptoLocker is significantly higher. If you're not training your staff to respect the idea of phishing emails, we do tests within Claranet, and you hope you get a gold star because you send it to the compliance people and say, oh, I think this is dodgy. But you always wonder, oh, have I just, those kind of bits. So training like that is absolutely key. So with the way hacking is working these days, it's keeping things updated. You can do that anywhere. So you can be as secure wherever you like. It's about understanding your world. I think personally that's easier to do in a public cloud, especially if you're using the technologies we suggest and best practices, and training your staff and making sure they're aware of the risks on the social engineering side. If you look at, there's a Russian hacker who has had most of the big hacking success stories, or company security failure stories, I suppose, have come through, and he's been on like most wanted lists for quite some time, and he always does it through social engineering. He always does it by managing to just find information about people that work there through means that you wouldn't even imagine. It's about just making people aware of that. I think when it comes to security in general, it's more than just building it right. So as much as we will give people that advice within the cloud practice, and what my colleagues do, vulnerability scanning, testing, penetration testing, stuff like this, things the guys at Sec1 do, the consultancy around that, the understanding the importance of data, that is as equally valuable. And one thing I'm seeing more and more is people kind of saying, and if you want to do a vulnerability test or penetration test within Amazon, let's say, you've got to let Amazon know. And so our accounts, our customers will ask us to make sure Amazon are aware. And that is happening more and more because people are taking these kind of penetration testing services. And that's been really key to improving security for people.
So how would I go about choosing a cloud partner? So if I'm a company, I've got virtual physical servers, virtual and physical servers rather.
Where do you put them?
Where do I put them?
That's a really good question. Something we're doing a lot of work with people with at the moment. And people have different strategies in this, right? Some people don't want to go all in with one provider. They want to either spread the risk. So if there's a relationship fallout, like I have seen in the past, or if it is a shift in company policy, maybe you have some customers that don't want to work with a certain provider, having those mixed skills are really beneficial. So myself and a few within the team spend quite a lot of our time doing just this at the moment, where people are going, where do I put this? And you kind of have to have a look. And one of the things we're noticing, people don't really understand what they've got. And this is normal, actually. I didn't imagine it would be, but when you actually think about it, it's quite common for the fact that your business changes, your personnel change, people that might have put something in place have left, documentation doesn't get kept up to date. And so one of the first steps is understanding what you've got. That helps you start making that decision. So if you understand that you're largely running Windows servers and you are writing everything in .NET, which is a language which is predominantly is Windows based, then you might consider yourself, well, the technologies that Microsoft are building into Microsoft Azure, they make the most sense for me because they're an easy fit. We're using similar pieces. We might be using Azure Stack in our data centers at the moment. That makes a bit of sense. If you're looking at getting really strong big data workloads and you're already using Google Analytics and Google Maps and stuff like that, then that will probably more naturally make you move in that direction. Amazon has been around the longest, is generally the most mature, has the most crazy wacky things like the ground station. They've got like VR and AR as a service, so you give it a model and it will run virtual reality for you, bits like that. So it's often around the use case. So things that concern me when people talk around going to cloud is having a cloud-only mentality. So they say, we're putting everything in cloud and we're just doing that. There is no choice. When you look at, we use the 6 R's. I know they're an Amazon concept, but they are universally accepted and they're very good. So you've got this idea of a rehost, so lift and shift, keep it as it is and just move it into a cloud provider. So no change. So it will cost more when it's there, but it will be a lot cheaper to move. You've got re-platform, make some slight tweaks, make bits of it use some of the Amazon services or the Azure service, the Google services to make your life easier managing it. It's going to cost you a bit more to make those changes, but it will probably run more efficiently once it's there. Refactor is the next one. That's where you actually break apart what you've got, re-engineer it, and then use those services that make it a lot cheaper in public cloud. So whether that's using functions, which are basically you give it a piece of code and it runs it when you tell it to, so you don't have to have that server anymore and stuff like this. Retire, so just switch it off. It's amazing how many people have stuff they can just switch off. like sometimes it's like 30 to 40% of people's estates.
30 to 40.
Yeah, it's staggered me at times. But again, it's quite normal because people are scared of switching things off. They kind of need a reason to. I don't know what's going to break.
Yeah.
And well, when you're moving it anyway, it's going to be switched off for a bit. Don't switch it back on, see what happens. Repurchase, so getting SaaS solutions, so Office 365. Stop having an Exchange server or a Skype server. Just let Microsoft deliver it for you, or Salesforce, or whatever it might be. And then retain. And this is the one where when people go, oh, we're just moving everything, they lose this ability to just retain, which means just to keep it where it is, because it works where it is. It doesn't make sense to move it. It's going to cost more where it goes, or it's going to be switched off in a couple of years anyway, or it just doesn't fit. And so when people tell me they've got the cloud-only mentality, and they kind of go, right, everything has to go somewhere, and then they say it has to go into one cloud, you're going to have pieces that really don't fit the jigsaw. And so when we recommend where things go, it should be on a workload by workload basis. It should be, what is the best thing for this? If you've chosen a cloud provider, so one customer I work with, for instance, are a Google partner, and they have a Google first mentality. So will it work okay in Google? If so, then yes, because that works for our partnership. But if actually it's not going to work there as well as it will somewhere else, they have the foresight to kind of go, right, well, the business case says this should go somewhere else. Yeah. And so, we find a lot of things around SQL, certain things you do around SQL make Azure the only place that some things will run in the way people want it to.
Yeah.
We find, due to the way that some of the pricing model works, if you're looking for just VMs as cheap as possible, then actually often Google will work out the simplest and the cheapest, and you can still do similar things. If you're wanting to do some cooler stuff, or try and have more of a rounded approach with bits of all different stuff, then we'll generally find Amazon. And if you're looking at your skills gap in your business, which is definitely a drive that people forget about, it's like, what should we do? Who should we use? Look at what your business can do. Have you got people that have gone from other jobs and they've been using Microsoft for years, or they've come from other jobs and used Amazon or Google? Yeah. Because actually that will reduce the amount of work, because when you try to move and you've got all the skills gap to fill as well, that's probably going to be your biggest challenge. The technology will be fine, it's the people that will be the challenge.
Who are running it, yeah.
So that's probably ones that people forget.
Earlier I heard you mention Alibaba.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that a bit more?
So it's an interesting one, and we're having more and more projects come up where it's considered as a possibility. So I'll give my view, and I'm not going to say this is Claranet's view. My view is that Alibaba now opening in Germany and with further data centers open in Europe, one thing that will happen is it will help Chinese business approach having European presence, which is probably a good thing. There's some brilliant businesses across there. It also allows European businesses to work in core China and to have infrastructure in core China. There are some real complexities around data in China that mean, like, Amazon have a data center in Hong Kong, for instance, and Google have one in Taiwan, and it's around kind of being close, but because of the importance or the protection around data of the Chinese government, that makes it quite complex. Yeah. Alibaba's technology is a bit different. The price point appears to be very reasonable, but in the same way that some people will be concerned around, like, the Patriot Act, which isn't really talked about very much anymore, where any company that is owned is a US company, the US government have the right to demand any data on any of their platforms. Yeah. I believe it's still the case that Microsoft get fined every day because they refuse to give information across, which is I think is a real positive for Microsoft. I think the same thing applies for Alibaba, that arguably data could be put back to the Chinese government. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's probably at least one of those misnomers that people need to understand to reduce the concern for them. The technology itself looks perfectly good.
Brilliant. Is it cheaper to move to the cloud?
No. my initial answer will certainly be no. If you don't do it right, it will cost you a lot more money. So I was on a panel recently where someone turned around and said 1 in 3 cloud projects will fail in 2019. What do why? And I kind of 2 answers came to my head at once. Yeah. One was that if you're using the cloud, you should be doing like minimal viable products. You should try loads of things, and like at least 2/3 of them should probably fail. So arguably that only 1/3 is failing is probably a good thing. But on the other side is when you actually look at it, and there was an article that I think Michelle put out probably about a year ago now about the 4 stages of cloud migration. There was one around the lift and shift, so rehosting. So people just moving it and putting it there and not changing anything to make it work better. If you do that, it will generally cost you more money to run. The reason for this is because you suddenly have this ability to have multiple data centers, because you've gone from a world where you might have 1 or 2, you've suddenly got, in one region with Amazon, you've generally got 3. So you might run things in 3 data centers if you can, because you want that resilience. But no one's probably told the finance department that you're gaining 50% resilience. They're kind of going, it's costing me 50% more or 30% more maybe. You've also got to include in any operating model you plan or any migration and business case, the cost of doing the move and what else you can get from it. You shouldn't, in my opinion, move to the cloud to save money. You should move to the cloud to get all those wonderful things that you can't do in your data center. So auto scaling, so we get a lot of people with that kind of problem. They're still sat in a place where they've got to ask like 6 weeks in advance to get extra machines to be able to handle a busy period of the year. Well, you can have that on demand in any of the public clouds, right? Yeah. To reduce your management overhead, not having to look after the kit and those bits. It's those grey costs and those business benefits that you get that you've got to focus on, and then you've got to decide whether the cost makes sense. It can be cheaper if you actually take the time, or you're a startup. If you're a startup, it's definitely going to be cheaper because you'll build it in the cheapest possible way from the word go. Yeah. When you've actually built in the world that you have, and you've been using physical machines or virtual machines, you need to make some changes to make it more cost effective, and it absolutely can be. But in year 1, it probably won't be, because you'll have to pay the money to do that work, and whether that's taking people off projects that they will be doing, and it's pieces like that. But if you're thinking cloud's going to be cheaper, it's probably not. It might be, but don't bank on it.
How can you control spend when you're on the cloud, moving to the cloud?
So, linking on to what we were just saying, it's the amount of people that go, think it's going to be cheaper, do a lift and shift, and then they find it's not. I went to see a customer who basically turned around and said, yeah, we budgeted for 60k a year on a platform, and it's looking like it's costing us 300. We're not sure why, but they're not experts on the platform, so that's not massively surprising. And you've gone and you've tried it, and that's absolutely brilliant. But you need people that know it, and you need people to go in and have a look. So the first thing is knowing the products. So I mean, you're fed up of hearing me say this because I say it on a lot of calls, but this is the only job I've had since I left school where I have to do homework. So I do at least 5 hours of homework every Tuesday night to learn all the new products coming out, so I can advise people on what might save them money and what's going to be the new best thing. Yeah. So first thing, you need to know the products. B, you need to know the best practices, those little things that you learn that because you've done it and you've tried it and all this kind of stuff. So those are a key part to building it right in the first place. Mm-hmm. The other part is to put some governance and some, we call it FinOps, financial optimization, or financial operations around it. And so you have alarms, you have set up so things that don't need to be on all the time get switched off, which has a benefit in cloud because you're paying for when you use it, while so you can switch it off and you don't have to pay for those machines, those fields that we talked about for the rest of the time. While on premise, you've still got them, so you don't switch it off because then you've got to just switch it back on again, and you've got to pay the same regardless. Yeah. So it's about having kind of foresight, planning around that, switching on and switching off test and dev environments, having it broken down so that when you use that great scaling technology, when it is quiet, it's as cheap as possible, and then it can go up to being expensive. And so you're trying to keep those economies of scale in your favour. So you go as small as you can when you can, but just have the capability to then burst as you need it.
And you control those figures, don't
you? You absolutely do, yeah.
Set minimum requirements and the maximum
exactly right. So it might be that you have minimum 1, maximum 1,000. But you should still put alerts in place around that, because what happens if you have a hacking attack, but not the kind of where someone's trying to get into your system, but somewhere you annoy someone and they go pay like $5 on the internet and get something called a DDoS attack. So there's basically loads of computers around the world which have been compromised, and they will just send requests. So not anything more than that, but they'll just basically kind of knock on the door of your website, but your website still responds. So it kind of goes, yeah, hi, who's there? It's like you're having to open your door all the time from prank callers, right? that will make it busy. So you'll get a load of these prank calls, and then you'll go from having one server, and then it'll be 10, and then you can end up having the 1,000 on at a time. So we always recommend trying to limit the number to what you expect it's going to be, then have the ability to have just someone get alerted and increase it.
Yeah.
And just have that response time in place.
Is one cloud provider more expensive than the other?
It's a very controversial question. So I would say they all have slightly different models, and it makes it really hard to compare. If someone said, hand on heart, Steve, which one is cheapest to run my VMs on, I would generally say Google.
Yeah.
And this is because if you keep a machine on for the entire month, Google will just give you 30% off straight away. It's called sustained usage policy. And then it kind of has a downward scale of how much discount you get for how much of the time it's switched on. You can do similar things in Amazon and Microsoft where you can reserve the instances. So you pay up front an amount, doesn't have to be full, but you basically agree to have that instance for a year or 3 years. And so therefore you get some discount for doing that and committing to them.
Mm-hmm.
What I like about the Google model is that you're not having to commit. It's a monthly by monthly thing, so it kind of fits into that real OPEX pay-as-you-go model.
Yeah.
So off the bat, without paying up front for anything, Google is going to be cheaper for a lot of simple virtual machine workloads. There are then challenges. So if we talked about Microsoft SQL earlier and how that can often fit better into Microsoft or at times into Amazon. And it's one thing to note, the licensing thing around Microsoft, it can be very complex, and all the cloud providers have brilliant teams. I know the guys at Amazon very well. I know some of the guys at Google, and obviously Microsoft do it for a living, where they'll try to help you optimize those costs a lot, because they're not really their platform costs, these are external costs. Yeah. And it always amused me that Microsoft's biggest customer is Amazon. Because of how many workloads they run. So they know a lot about it, and they can help. On certain platforms, it can be more expensive to run things like Microsoft SQL, where you're charged per CPU. Okay. So per kind of thinking part of the computer, you are charged an amount of money, and the way those are licensed are different across the cloud. So sometimes Google can come out worse because of that. So it's a balancing act. So I've worked with some people where Google has been like 20-30% cheaper, and I've had others where it's been 5% more expensive, 10% more expensive, because of the amount of certain technologies. Okay, so a decent chunk of the time it can be one, but then if you're willing to commit to 3 years, it might be a different one. And so we've built a tool, like a model tool, where you take out, throw your numbers at us, and we'll tell you what it's going to cost in each of them, and it can really change day to day. So it really depends what you're trying to do. No answer is simple. I'm trying to make it simple for demystifying the cloud, but no answer is really simple.
And what would you need to give a customer that answer?
So the tool we've built basically works from a VMware dump. So they basically give us an Excel sheet or a CSV out of their environment. We throw it in this sausage factory, and it comes out with a result at the end. Really, it's a clever piece of kit that's one of the guys built, but it fires out pricing, and then you can change things. You can say, "Oh, we're willing to commit for 3 years. We're going to change these technologies," and it will come out with a result. So it's actually not particularly labour intensive on the customer. I just feel sorry for the poor computer that has to do all the working out, because it's pretty hard work.
So if I'm a customer and I want to move to the cloud, where do I start?
So this is going to sound pretty obvious, but it's amazing how often this is missed. Start with a business case. Have an idea of what you want to achieve. Are you trying to get cost savings, like we talked about earlier? Are you trying to improve your delivery to market, and how quickly you can bring out new products? Are you trying to cope with Black Friday because last year was a car crash? It's those kind of things. What are you trying to do? So once you've got a bit of an idea, the next thing that people have to do is consider, what have they got? So it's staggering again how many people don't know where they are. So you've got to understand your current position to be able to work out how you get to your end goal. When I've seen projects happen where there hasn't been a level of discovery, or there's been big gaps in knowledge, they don't work. Yeah. Your aim to get to Nirvana, which could have been done in 3 months with good understanding, will take 3 years, and you will burn yourselves and decide that public cloud and transformation aren't for you. But it's actually because the time hasn't been taken to work out what you've got, where you are, what you want to do with it. So step one, know what you're trying to achieve in the business level. Don't worry about the technical. Just think, what am I trying to achieve? Then have a bit of an idea of where am I now? Again, not just on the technical piece, but within the business. Understand what staffing capabilities you've got, where you're lacking. Often partners can help with this. We do a lot of consulting around these things. And then it's have a really concise plan of how you're going to get there. So it doesn't have to be your low-level design with your detail, I'm going to use this service, and this service. It's got to be, these are the people that are going to deliver this business capability and empower them to do it. So build out teams of capability. We often call it a cloud centre of excellence or cloud competency centre, which is a group of people that maybe oversee the capability within the business. So if you're empowering different groups in the business to go and do things, they should have a group of people that are approved by the business to be able to kind of go, how do we do this? What's the safe way of doing this? So if it was Claranet doing a cloud transformation for ourselves, we should agree what we're trying to achieve and what Claranet good looks like. And you have this centre of excellence is keeping people in that kind of reality of what good looks like for Claranet.
Alongside that, so I've come to Claranet, I want to move to cloud, I know what my business case is. What internal resource would I need?
So Claranet have quite a simple image of this is something that we want to do with you and not to you. So we want you to remain masters of your own destiny and be able to understand what has been done. So you need to have your community bought in. So if you've got a tech community, not all of our customers do, some of them have always had that outsourced, but whoever is going to be responsible for that outsourcing contract or for that relationship should be really involved heavily. I personally feel that projects work better when there's a project manager on both sides. And if you've got third-party development houses, they should be involved in the process. When these things come from the business, that in itself is fine. But when they come from the business without involving the technical community and are kind of laid on top of them rather than kind of built with them, that generally is a recipe for disaster. So often what we do when we get in is straight away, when we do that piece of working out what you've got, is go in and talk to the tech guys, ask them what they're trying to achieve and help them try to marry that up in the business case. So you need to have the technical people on board, you need to have a governance piece there, so whoever's owning that relationship, all that has to understand the concerns, and then I would say project management on top of that as well.
Would you need to have a cloud specialist within your company? So
depends on your long-term plan. So I don't think it hurts. I certainly think you want to be able to understand what a crucial part of your business probably is doing, and so having someone with expertise and not fully outsourcing that is probably for the best. So we work with some retailers who don't really have an ops team. They use us for that, and they have load of developers. But their developers are switched on a tech, and so are their e-commerce managers. So, they can talk to us intelligently about what we do. They're not shocked by it. So they might not be cloud experts, but they're experts enough in what they do and how it interacts with what we do that it still works. If you want to long-term be running it yourself, then the sooner you have people in place to be learning from a company like Claranet, then the better they're going to be served in being able to long-term kind of hold that vision together.
How long does it take to migrate to the cloud?
Depends what you're migrating. So we've recently moved some Magento sites, so e-commerce sites. We've done quite a lot of these. It was kind of very much our bread and butter as a cloud practice initially. We've moved some of those in weeks, whether it be 6 weeks for some relative size ones. We moved Lush, is a common case study, right, that people talk around, in 22 days, moving their entire e-commerce platform due to 22 days due to some complexity. Don't get me wrong, that's a lot of people working for 22 days, but in terms of man hours, it's significantly higher. But you can really whip it in. But if you want to make a good job and you're changing a relatively complex business, really you want to do this in we call it tranches. So you work out what can be moved together and move those, and then kind of get that handed over, make sure it's running right, then move another one. So I think if you want a really successful cloud migration, you're probably looking at 2 to 3 years. If you're a relatively complex business, you'll get some low-hanging fruit that you can move across pretty quickly. But firstly, you've got to set yourselves up right, understand what you don't know, understand where you are, build those teams, start that skills gap, and then you want them in place so they can start learning from the low-hanging fruit, and then they will grow and develop as you're moving more and more stuff across. So when you're looking at people with thousands of machines, you shouldn't be doing that in 22 days. You should be doing that in 2 to 3 years.
So it's dependent on size and what you want.
I think, well, we've done some projects where it's been like a simple application piece needs pulling across and it's taken 5 days.
Yeah.
But then we've done some projects where someone's trying to transform their entire business and not just lift and shift it, but take that apart and do it, and that's taken thousands of days. So it might be multiple people working on it, but literally, you know, you've had 3 people working on it for a year, helping build that out. So it's very much what you're trying to achieve and how big the task is. But yeah, so anything from 5 days to 3 years. Well, hopefully we've demystified the cloud a bit there, Andrea.
Hopefully.
Anything else you'd like to ask, or do you think we've?
I think we've covered quite a good basis there.
My brain feels empty. So thank you very much.
Mine feels full. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for watching and listening. And hopefully we'll see you again soon.